Waiting for Seconds is a podcast that talks about subjects of self-harm, suicide, eating disorders, and other personal subjects. If you don't feel comfortable listening to this podcast alone, listen to it with someone important to you. May that be a teacher, a parent figure, or someone you feel comfortable being with. Please enjoy the rest of the episode.
This is Waiting for
No,
Seconds.
stop it.
What the fuck?
I'm introducing.
Oh, yeah, you have to do the... Oh, yeah. Fuck you. Your introductions are bad. You're a little bitch, man. Go ahead.
You're not the one who edits them.
Do the...
I'm not going to mimic it. I'm just going to... Alright, no. You go. Keep going.
I don't know how it goes from there.
This is Waiting for Seconds, the interview podcast where we meet people and ask them who they are and why they are. I'm Shannon Miller, and I'm here with Malcolm Alkelt. And today
Hi.
Hi, Malcolm.
Hi, Shannon. How's it going?
And today we will be talking with Cam. If you would go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Cam. I'm a 22-year-old with one cat named Mochi, a raging caffeine addiction, and a music taste that's been described as sad hop.
And as her friend, that is a very accurate description. Cam and I have been friends for a couple of years now. We met entirely online during the height of the pandemic through some mutual friends and a shared love of tabletop RPGs. We've been playing some things on and off ever since then. And, we've got a couple questions for you, Cam.
I'm gonna break the ice.
Break the ice.
What's Mochi like? How's your little kitty like? Tell us about your little kitty.
Well, to preface, she's fantastic. I love her very much. But,
I knew there was a butt coming.
she's a long-haired cat, and she's a very messy long-haired cat. So she's a little bit of work, but, like, she's very fun, and she's very cuddly, although you can't pick her up. She would like to cuddle you from, like, beside you. She must never be on top of you. She must be beside, but she needs to have physical contact.
That's kind of weird to have a
It
cat
is.
like that.
What a weird cat.
She's a very strange cat, but she's my cat, so
And you
She's
love
your
her.
cat and you love her.
I love her very much.
You adopted her when she was a kitten, right?
Yeah, she was 12 weeks when I got her. Oh, I got her last year, and
Oh.
so she's actually just turned a year old in October, and I picked her up at like the end of January, start of February. And now she lives in my room, eats ridiculously expensive food, and has like I use like special organic non-clay litter for her, stuff like that.
Aw,
You know,
she's picky.
yeah, she's very picky, but she's my spoiled little baby, and I love her.
You gotta
That's-
spoil your little baby. That's just the right way to do it.
Exactly.
Have you ever had other animals?
I have when I was younger. I had a dog when I was younger. Her name was Rosalie. She was a cockapoo. It's a cocker spaniel poodle mix. And I had her for a few years, but just kind of due to circumstance and me being really young, I was about 12 at the time. I moved cross country, and unfortunately, the place we moved to is not pet friendly, but we also couldn't afford anything else at the time. So, we actually, friends of ours, she was a trainer for special needs dogs, and they like to have other, like, quote unquote normal dogs around sometimes. So she offered to bring her in and have her be part of her program. And so my last few updates on her a couple of years back were she was living her best life. She'd had a bunch of dogs to play with every day. So that actually made me really happy.
Well, good for
That's
her.
good.
Yeah.
You actually mentioned that you moved. How has the place, like, you've grown up, really affected you? You said you were moving. What was the reason, and did it change your childhood, make it better? How did that How did that help you?
So for me, I grew up in a very small town in Ontario, which is it's the largest province population-wise in Canada.
Mm.
But I grew up in a very small town, population like less than 4,000 people. It's, at least when I left there, it was a blink and you miss it kind of highway town. And I had a school and some smaller things, but got a grocery store when I was about 6. That was a pretty big deal then. Got a Tim Hortons, which is like the Canadian equivalent of like Dunkin' Donuts around when I moved away, which was also a huge deal for a town like that. But kind of growing up in that space, it wasn't the best environment for me. Unfortunately, like, schools there were really poorly funded. There was a lot of poverty, a lot of kids. I was one of the fortunate ones that I always had food on the table and a roof over my head. But like there were a lot of kids who were very food insecure, which is just heartbreaking, especially now that I'm older and kind of have a better understanding of some of the programs and why they were in place, in my primary school.
Mm.
And then just generally, like, I guess it had that small town mentality of that anti-other, anti-change, very anti-leaving kind of mentality.
Yeah. And how do you think has that affected your politics or your view on the world in some way?
I mean, it's
Growing up
absolutely
in a small town?
affected my politics and my view on the world. I think for me, one of the hardest things has been kind of that transitioning from that kind of political landscape where you grow up to where when I was about 12, I moved to a larger city, Edmonton in Alberta, Canada, which is still like one of the more, it's, I guess, the more right-leaning of all the provinces, but moving to a city just drastically changed a lot of my worldview. I met different people who I'd never met anyone like them before, at least not who'd openly been, gay or bisexual or trans, anything like that. I hadn't met those people before who were open about it.
Mhm.
And it really just changed my whole worldview. And that's something that I think is kind of that cognitive dissonance of growing up in such a conservative environment and then moving to an environment where I realized, hey, I can do these things. And, there's no longer that dogmatic association of, being gay will make you a terrible person.
Yeah. That's very interesting. So you clearly have moved around a lot, or at least a little bit, but do you do things like travel for pleasure rather than for necessity?
Yes, I travel for pleasure quite a bit. Thankfully in the years that I've grown up, my parents have found themselves in a much better financial situation
Mhm.
over the years to where we've started traveling pretty regularly. I get to travel with them. They're currently on a boat in the Bahamas, and I'll be joining them in about a month and a half. I'll be joining them in December and spending Christmas out there. We've regularly gone to Hawaii. We've gone to the Bahamas quite a bit. We've taken one trip over to Europe, which was probably one of the best months of my life. Um, Traveled through a couple of the different parts of the United States and a lot of Canada as well.
Yeah.
So it's absolutely something I view as important. And kind of my next big travel goal is I'm hoping to do a solo trip in the next year or two to Japan is my kind of goal. I would really love to go and see it when the sakura blossoms are blooming.
Hmm.
Hell yeah.
It's
Yeah.
a beautiful time. Well, clearly that's been at least some form of formative for you. Do you think it's like really changed the way that you see the world, seeing the other places and how they function, or is it just like a good time?
I think that traveling is one of the things that has changed me the most as a person. To not only get to see people, it's one thing to learn about a culture in a theoretical sense when you're reading a textbook or even when you're watching a YouTube video of someone being like,
Mm.
a day in the life in my, small town in Greece or something like that,
Yeah.
versus when you go there and you get to live and experience it. Like when I went to Italy and we were in kind of some of the small towns, like the non-touristy areas, and there's just like a 2-hour nap time throughout the day. and things are open much later. But yeah, there's 2 hours and all the shops are closed and everybody's gonna go take a break and have a nap. And it really felt like a much healthier lifestyle than especially we lead in North America.
Mm.
And a big part of for me traveling has been this whole idea that I feel so very privileged to be able to travel, and I want to take advantage of that. I want to see the world. Because, I mean, realistically, we're living in a generation and time where you can see the world depending on how you prioritize and if you have enough disposable income, which, unfortunately, some people don't. But for the people who do, it's an absolutely fantastic opportunity. And I'd say anybody who can travel should do it at least once in their lifetime.
What's been your most favorite place that you've gone to so far?
That's hard. Because, okay, I'm an art history major. I finished my degree the spring of this year. And so I loved going to Italy. I got to go through pretty much every art gallery there, top to bottom, spent about 5 to 8 hours in each museum.
Badass.
Bored my parents to death because they wanted to get out of there and go to wineries or things like that, But for me instead, that was what I enjoyed. But also Hawaii has a certain amount of sentimentality to it. It's where my parents got married and I got to go to the wedding. It's the first place I traveled where I had to take an airplane that went over water.
Yeah.
First time I really got in the ocean. So it's kind of a close tie between those two.
I mean,
Well, both of those places are truly lovely.
I would recommend it if you ever get the chance to. Either of them are great options. Flip a coin.
I definitely want to go see Italy. I went to Hawaii one time. It was for about a week for spring break. It was a choir tour thing, and that was a lot of fun. But Italy is definitely somewhere I want to go. So, now you were talking kind of about your worldview with going to different places. What is your worldview, or maybe let's change that question. Are you more spiritual or religious in any way? And has that changed when you have gone to these different places? Has that made you rethink maybe where you were now in your spiritual walk or whatever you were doing?
I don't know if necessarily travel is what changed it. A big part of what changed my beliefs in terms of spirituality and religion and things like that has been partially seeing the world through travel has helped, as well as just experiencing the world while living in a city, experiencing the world while living as a young adult woman. But a big part of that was also I minored in religious studies, and I spent quite a few years, even prior to that, kind of having a bit of a struggle with what it was I believed, because trying to assess it, I guess, the whole idea of if there is something after this, what would be after this, what kind of, being, if this world is designed, how does a being design this world and then remain a conscionable and benevolent actor, things like that. And so kind of after, taking about 20 courses, reading quite a few holy books, I've came to the decision essentially that I believe that there's something. I don't necessarily believe I have any idea what or who that would be. If that makes any sense. I've decided that there is something after this life, and whether that's hopeful thinking, whether I'm right or wrong, I guess I'll find out, or cease to exist and by default kind of find out, or kind of figure out what it is that I believe in, because I think it's something that you kind of have to struggle with. I think any faith accepted without thinking about it or asking yourself why you believe in that necessarily, I don't know if that can be true.
Yeah. Well, you bring up these kind of two alternate endings, the end where we just cease to exist and the end where, well, there's something after this. That kind of lie on the opposite side of the scale. One that's maybe idealized or at least a good version, and one that's kind of sadder. And all in all, you seem to lean towards the one side, the more idealized version. But in general life, I'd love to know if that stays the same. Do you consider yourself to be an optimist or a pessimist in the way that you live your life, or your spirituality in general?
I don't know if I'm necessarily like a hard optimist or a hard pessimist. The reason that I more so believe that there is something after this is part of it is a certain degree of wishful thinking. Because for many, for quite a few years, I was of the opinion that, well, science has, thus far failed to prove an afterlife, despite dozens, if not hundreds, of scientists trying to prove some kind of God or afterlife or something that is, in a way supernatural.
Mhm.
And that's been unable to be proven. However, I kind of took analysis of my worldview, and it made me sad to think of the world that way. And it really, to me, became a question of, do I want to hold this view that I think, maybe the most congruent with the reality that we know right now? Or do I want to choose to have a worldview that is going to make me happy, that doesn't harm others, and that, could be right? And I decided that there was something after this because I want there to be. And because I hope that, you know, we don't just get 80 years of this short life and then there's nothing. I want there to be something after. And maybe that's wishful thinking on my part, and maybe it's naive, but it's a worldview that makes me happy.
And either way, it doesn't harm anybody.
Exactly. Like, at the end of this life, if I die and there is nothing after this, it won't have harmed me to have believed in an afterlife.
Yeah.
And it won't have harmed anyone else.
It's very, very wonderfully said.
Mhm.
I really like that, and I appreciate you sharing that with us. So what I'm getting is you don't have a specific religion. You've done your countless of hours of research in college, and there's no like real religious that you like stand by. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah, there's no religion I necessarily stand by. There are certain beliefs about how I should live my life that I agree with.
Hmm.
I believe in the ideas of doing no harm, doing unto others what I would have done unto myself, of, being a positive member of society, of trying to leave this world a better place than it was, I guess, entrusted to us. I'm a very firm believer in the fact that living a good life and through good moral action, we attain a better life for ourselves and for those around us. And so that's kind of how I've tried to live my life. We all have our own shortcomings, but
Yeah. Now, were you religious in your childhood? Like, sorry.
I grew up Christian, actually. I grew up Baptist. I went to 2 church
okay.
camps a summer.
Hell yeah.
Grew up very, very Baptist. So that was definitely an interesting experience, especially kind of struggling with, I don't know, did you grow up Baptist or Christian?
I grew up Seventh-day Adventist.
Oh God.
So I'm in a different world of hell.
Yeah. Yeah, I heard, wasn't there something about like the world ending a few years ago and it starting like,
Oh, like 2012.
yeah, and like wasn't there
December
some
12th.
Seventh-day Adventism stuff though with the world ending a few years ago?
I'm more non-denominational. I'm still Christian. I cannot recall if that was ever a thing besides like back in the, is it 1800s? Something Miller. The Millerites, kind of like an Adventist movement with Jesus doing a second coming. And then it didn't work out. but on it recently, no, I don't know.
Yeah, fair enough. I have a friend who's a former Seventh-day Adventist and has told me some very wild stories, so I'm assuming you might have some interesting ones, but I don't know. It could also have just been the branch that she was in as well.
There is some wild stories, but there's nothing that I particularly know of. But back to what you were saying about being Baptist, and that's how you kind of grew up.
Yeah, like I definitely didn't grow up in like an extremely religious household. Like we said grace over dinner, we believed in God. I had a copy of the Bible that I read sometimes, but it wasn't necessarily like a strictly religious household in the same way. Like the restriction of media in my household wasn't due to religious reasons. It would often be like, yeah, you're not allowed to play Call of Duty because that video game is abhorrently violent. Things like that. I was allowed to read Harry Potter and Aragon and a lot of those books that were kind of in the banned category because of, magic and witches and wizards and things like that. But it was definitely interesting, especially kind of having I had some family members who are much more Baptist than us, and kind of that dichotomy of belief as well as like unfortunately judgment within the community was something we dealt with because we weren't as, we didn't go to church every Sunday. We, didn't quite live the same lifestyle that people would want you to. But I
Or
think
expecting you to live.
Yeah. Or expecting you to live for sure, because it was an expectation, like to be giving like an 8% of your income tithe, which, especially it was looking back, it's heartbreaking to see all the really poor families who were giving 8% of their income to the church and things like that, which it's difficult to look back at because I think that there are inevitably a lot of flaws with organized religion. And that's really what started my journey down not really believing in the Christian God anymore was unfortunately my experience, especially with organized religion, has been a negative one. And it's not unique to me, unfortunately. It has been something that I've heard extremely similar stories of, kind of the hurt and feelings of unwelcomeness within certain communities that is extended. It's not just the Christian community, it's in a lot of, if not all, religious communities. But I think that's kind of been my problem is when you read certain holy texts, things look great on paper, but unfortunately, there is an inevitable othering in a lot of the times in these organized religious settings.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a very appropriate understanding of religion. It often can have value to people, but often that value is outshadowed.
Yeah.
Well, I'd love to ask you a little bit about your understanding less of your religious beliefs, but of your more societal and political beliefs. Specifically, I want to ask you about masculinity and femininity. As you probably know, you're the first woman we've actually had on here. Whether that is celebration. But
Definitely
I want to know.
celebration.
I want to know about your thoughts on society's view of men and women in particular. Obviously, masculinity is this concept. Femininity is this concept that are well defined and often forced on the people that they apply to. But I want to know about your thoughts about masculinity and femininity as subjects, as well as the men and women who embody them.
Yeah, I think it's definitely hard because I think there is definitely a degree of, we have the ideal, stereotypical gender roles that have been around for ages and ages of, male breadwinner, woman homemaker, and what those roles entail. But I think what's really interesting when you dig down into it for me has been how those roles have kind of contributed to the breakdown of, modern day society, the modern day workforce, what home work life balance looks like as, a person living in the 21st century.
Mhm.
And what I've kind of learned over time was that a lot of this division of labor that was done in like a stereotypical household is now kind of being really used against people, because if you look at it, like the stereotypical household used to be, you'd have a woman whose job was to raise the kids, to clean the house, to, do the dishes, to
Mhm.
do every single part of homemaking. And the man's job was to work like 8 to 10 hours a day, 5 days a week, and to then, come home and basically be pampered by his wife. When the reality of the situation is now for most people is, especially with inflation in the post-pandemic economy, is a lot of the times you need a dual income household. But in that dual income household, you're still expected to be working 8 to 10 hour days, 5 days a week. But now you don't have a person at home who's doing all of the household and emotional labor.
Mhm.
And so my kind of problem with this whole idea of what it means to be a man or a woman in today's society is that there is a certain extension of how this ideal has contributed to a disproportionate amount of labor. Like if you look at it, the breakdown of daily labor by gender, women do on average more labor per day because there is still this expectation of, you get home, and if a man and a woman get home together, in most households, it's still going to be the woman cooking.
Mhm.
In most households, the woman is going to do the majority of the cleaning. Of course, there are exceptions. I'm not saying this is even the vast majority, but it's the majority.
Mhm.
And so for me, being a woman living in today's world, it's a very hard point to navigate because I'm a woman who wants to be a mother in a few years. I'd like to raise children, but I also would like to make money and have a financially stable household. So it feels to a certain extent, especially as a woman, like you're put in this kind of catch-22 situation where damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Uh-huh.
If you choose to go back to the workforce immediately after having a child, you're heartless and abandoning them and, hiring a nanny. How could you? Whereas if you choose to be a stay-at-home mom, you're being, lazy, you're not being a girl boss, things like that. Whereas also there's these massive amounts of economic expectations on men. Like I have no idea what it is, but every time I've offered to pay for like a first date with a guy, I swear that I have just like killed someone in front of him, or like you either get this reaction of like, oh my god, thank you, no one's ever offered to do that, or you get this really weird reaction of like, what, you think I'm not enough of a man to pay for dinner? And I'm like, no, I'm offering to pay for dinner because like shit's expensive, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, shit's expensive.
Shit is in fact expensive.
I know I've definitely had that reaction of like I never said it out loud, but it's that reaction of like, does she think I'm not? I don't have enough money. But it's kind of changed as society has gone on. I mean, there's been dates that I've had where the woman will pay half, and I'm like totally down with that.
I think it's almost, and maybe this is a little strange to say, it's an interesting litmus test as a woman. And like when I was dating, I currently have a significant other. But when I was dating, an interesting litmus test is that whole idea of offering to pay for the first date, because kind of seeing how a guy especially reacts to that offer, it kind of informs a lot about what, a future relationship would look like,
Mhm.
in my opinion. Because like even if I offer to
Mhm.
pay and they're like, okay, let's go halves, versus, they freak out, or, you know, those different options, it's informative in a way. And, I just hope it comes to a point where hopefully, years from now, it won't be an expectation for, the children of our generation
Mhm.
where, women aren't expected to be putting in all the household labor and men are expected to be putting in all the extra financial burden.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'd like it to be that way, but sometimes when you look at the news and society, it's not exactly hopeful.
Yeah.
Those changes take a lot of effort and aren't exactly easy to make happen.
Yeah. But
Well,
hopefully they happen.
hopefully they do. I'd love to ask you about, you mentioned your family a little bit earlier. I know you're going out to the Bahamas with them in a couple of weeks, but I'd love to ask you more about your family. How has your family life been? Has it been generally happy, generally, difficult experiences that you care to talk about? Um, do you think that it was a good childhood experience, or do you think that there were a lot more flaws than the average person's?
I mean, I would say I'm a relatively lucky person, but also, inevitably the flaws that we do find are what concern us the most because,
Hmm.
I can look at some other kids and be like, wow, your parents were absolutely awful to you. That's terrible. And then I can look at my own childhood and be like, these are some awful moments within my childhood that definitely have affected me. But also, my relationship with my parents, especially as I've gotten older, has been it's very much a loving relationship. It
Hmm.
is, my parents have always been here for me, no matter my screw ups, no matter my choices. They're very much people who believe that, I'm their kid and they will stick by me no matter
Uh-huh.
what. And for that, I'm super appreciative. Um, but I also did grow up. So I grew up. So when I say my parents, I guess to break it down, the people I'm referring to are the people I call mom and dad.
Hmm.
My
Right.
dad is not my biological father. My biological father is the man who raised me till I was about 11, along with my mother. He is not a good person, unfortunately. He was a abusive person.
Uh-huh.
Um, and I had a lot of negative childhood experiences associated with him. I've recently actually finally made the decision to cut him off from my life,
Hmm.
which has been one of the most freeing decisions I have ever made. Um, and my mom did what she had to get me out of there and to get me safe. And she risked and sacrificed a lot to do that.
Hmm.
Um, but for me, my family life has been, there are obviously stressors, but it's also nice that at least my parents have had an open door policy with me, is how they describe it, which is, if there's ever something I need to talk to them about, if I've done something wrong,
Hmm.
if I need to do anything, they're always there. They even had the policy of when I was younger and when you start going to parties, you start drinking for the first time and things like that. They always had a policy that no matter what, if I just called them middle of the night, doesn't matter. They'll, get up, they'll find a way to come and get me and pick me up, no questions asked, as long as I call them.
That's very good of them.
Hmm.
It seems like a very healthy relationship with a lot of, obviously no relationship can ever be perfect, but very, very well maintained and, smart. Well
Hey,
done.
a big part of maintaining a family relationship, at least in our case, is like all of us see a therapist.
Oh
I
yeah.
see a therapist about once every 6 weeks. I don't quite know the frequency of their schedules, but for me, that's been a big part of maintaining, my mental health and also just having better communication strategies, having better strategies for coping with stress, having
Hmm.
just different ways to go about your worldview has been very helpful in a way. Um, Honestly, I'd recommend therapy to almost anyone, as you know,
Yeah.
just because I think that sometimes having another person take that look in and help you parse out your life can be very helpful. It's what I
Hmm.
found helpful, especially like when I've gone through some hard times. Having someone else help you figure out, what is your fault, what in reality is not your fault, what's no one's fault. And then also, how do you solve issues in a way that is going to make everyone's life livable and happy? And maybe learning a little bit about like what styles of communication people need.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Well, you mentioned that there's some stresses in your family earlier, and your therapy, is that your primary way of dealing with those stressors, both with your family and in your life in general?
Like, therapy helps a little bit. My primary way of dealing with stress on a day-to-day basis, though, is League of Legends.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm a support main, so, I get beat up on by my ADC and the enemy ADC.
Yes.
But yeah, I play video games to get rid of my stress because if I yell and scream at my computer, not in all chat, just at the computer, uh, it's not gonna harm anyone, and it's a good way for me to just be like, God, I hate everything, and let it out in a way that is, non-harmful, and also it's helpful to me.
Mhm.
Do you play a lot of video games?
I play a decent amount of video games. It's like I mostly play stuff with friends. To
Mhm.
be honest, like I've been playing some Minecraft recently. I started a farm under a glacier because that's how you farm, right?
Yeah,
Um
apparently.
I've started, to like I play obviously a lot of League of Legends. I've done a couple playthroughs where I'll like stream to some friends like of different Mass Effect playthroughs, sometimes where I'll let them make the decisions and my shepherd's a dick.
Mm.
Sometimes where I make the decision and my shepherd's a very nice person,
Yeah.
Um, but a big thing for me has always been like I think of gaming as a way of, I guess, connecting with people.
Mhm.
I, I have always been someone who's struggled in a way with in-person connection. I struggle with body language quite a bit. I sometimes struggle with tone as well. Just like understanding people and making sure that, I'm giving off the right signals back.
Mhm.
Um, which isn't I'm not always successful, but I'm trying my best. But a big thing for me has been the nice part about at least spending most of my social time on the internet has been I get to know people in a way that, it's different than in person, for sure, but I definitely feel that same amount of connection. Like there are people I've met online who have changed my life so much more than I ever could have imagined.
Mhm.
And it's been a big part of kind of not only forming my personality and my worldviews, but also experiencing and meeting people who, without this magic, internet box that we have, I never would have met. And kind of worldviews I never would have considered.
Interesting that a lot of the people that you've never actually met in person can change who you are in such a dynamic and involved way.
Not to mention, a lot of the people who I've met on the internet and who I haven't met in person know probably more about me than some of my in person friends. Like, they know more of what my interests are and what makes me happy and what makes me sad and how I do my day to day life.
Now, do you think that's because like there's less of a filter on the internet? There's less reason to hide those things, less possibility to be judged, or is that just a
I think there is less of a filter in a certain way because there are certain things I can't say to you if you're a person I know in person because, say, like, I can't tell you every single detail about how my workday was
Mhm.
just because, there's certain confidentiality, things like that. Whereas when you're a person I meet online, if I don't say any names and I just say, wow, I dealt with an absolute asshole today who had
Yeah.
no idea what they were doing, then I can kind of talk about that. I can also talk about to a certain degree, like, at least my experience on the internet has been, you can get into that heavy shit in a way that you can't in real life. Where, like, if you get into the heavy shit of, hi, what's your childhood trauma? On the internet, it's almost a thing of most people are much more willing to share and it's a much more reciprocal relationship. Whereas if you ever, like, a lot of the times when I've been asked about my childhood trauma and or anything else that's happened in my life, in person and you give them that real response, you get the, "Oh, that is so sad." And they have this, like, panicked look of, "I don't know what to say here, please can we move on?" So, maybe it's just because on the internet I can't see the panicked look, but at least it's
It's hidden from you.
exactly. If I can't tell you're panicking, I think you're encouraging me.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Can't see it, it
Definitely.
doesn't exist.
Definitely a good way to look at things. I mean, I can agree. I've never actually met Malcolm like in person, but he definitely is considered like family to me, or just like just has that similar relationship that I could call him family.
I mean, that's kind of a big part about family, though, is I am at least of the opinion that you choose your family more than family is defined by blood or distance or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the people I would consider my family are not necessarily my closest blood relatives. They're the people, it's my parents, the people who, the friends who have helped encourage me to grow, who've helped me through, things like the bad times and the good times and helping me move for like the 7th time and so much moving, so many boxes and so much like of that stupid clear tape that just gets stuck on everything
God,
and
that clear tape.
tangles.
Ugh.
Tape gun. Number one investment if you're planning to be someone who moves around a lot in life, get a tape gun.
Yeah.
It makes life so much easier. It is obnoxiously loud though. So like don't do that if you have like a quiet policy wherever you live, because that thing sounds like halfway to a chainsaw. So it's a give and take.
Yeah.
But
That's interesting that you say your family is more than blood. You get to pick your family. Does that how do you pick your family, if you don't mind me asking? Is
I
it
mean, for me, how I've picked my family has been, it is partially the people who you choose to spend your time with. It's who you choose to dedicate your, emotional labor to. Like, if I only have, it's like that kind of spoon theory in a way, but for families, where my family is the people I've chosen as people who I view as worthy of emotional investment and who I would like to keep in my life, who
Mhm.
we have this kind of reciprocity of respect and love and care for one another. And for me, a big part of family is that fact that, we choose each other. Family is not just because you're not here because you have to be here. You're here because you want to be. Like, that whole joke it used to be like, and it started for like, especially in American sitcoms, I think in like the 50s and stuff, of like this whole idea of like the man and wife who hate each other so much, but they're married. And that they're family, but God, they hate each other. And, you hate your in-laws and you hate your parents. And for me, that's not what is family. Your family doesn't have to be defined by the blood in your veins. It's defined by the people you choose. So, if you want to have a family, you got to put effort into loving and caring for that family.
mm-hmm.
And that's what's going to make it be a family. You don't just get to family accidentally. You make a conscientious choice, in my mind. And, that may not be a view shared by everyone else, but at least for me, my focus when it comes to choosing someone to be what I would consider family has been this idea that I want to spend time with them, I like them, I care about them, and we have this mutual feeling of love and admiration and we want to help one another. We want to see each other succeed.
That's very well put.
Very beautiful too. I think that's a very healthy view on family. To understand that it may not be about the blood, but it's about the love and the care. And without those things, it's not really a family.
Yeah, exactly. Like you can be related to someone, but that doesn't make them family. Being related to someone does not entitle them to your love or your care or your time. Realistically, being related to someone means that if you take a test on 23andMe and you both spit in a tube, you get a really awkward email notification.
Yeah. And really, awkward email notifications do not make family.
They do not.
Well, I would love to ask you, it's come up a lot both in the former episodes and in this one, about this concept of nature and nurture. Nature, obviously, being how you're born and who you are innately, almost. And nature being who you've been formed to be. With your talk of family being not blood, but rather found, does it feel fair to say that you are resolutely on the side of nature?
I mean, I would say that would fit nurture because in my mind, nurture has always been.
Oh, I said nature.
Yeah,
You fool.
you did. You did.
I'm
You
full.
You said nature
fool.
or nature.
So you would say you fall on the side of nurture.
Yeah, I fall on the side of nurture. I fall on the side of kind of, I believe how you were raised and the lived experiences that you have are formed, kind of they form you and you know, it's that mutual ripple effect. This isn't to say like there are cases where, you know, unfortunately nature is inherently limiting or inherently kind of impacting how a person can live and the experiences they can have. But I think that we are far more defined by our experiences than we are by, our nature if we're born that way. It's like that whole idea of like born evil. I don't think anything is necessarily born evil or born good. I think that the experiences someone has are, and then the actions they take thereafter, which are formed from those experiences, that make you, a primarily, good acting or a primarily bad acting person.
So there's no inherent, like, when you're born, you're not evil and you're not good. It's until you've made or you've gotten those conscious decisions that this is how you want to live your life, and other people's eyes, it might be bad or it might be good. But for you just look at it as that. Stop me if I'm wrong, but you look at it as depending on who you surround yourself with will make you into those choices of good or bad.
Yeah, and I think that's inevitably how it is. I mean, the 5 people you talk to the most will end up informing parts of your language, even in the how you start to speak to other people. So, like, if the 5 people you talk to most all, are people who have very fervent, you know, let's say they have very fervent racist beliefs, you're more likely to end up becoming racist. You talk to 5 people who are communists, you're more likely to end up a communist. We're informed by the decisions that we make of who we surround ourselves with. It's kind of like how that whole idea of when you start like reading a lot of the times, the first few books you read will end up being kind of that same author style will be what you gravitate towards. It's that same thing of, if someone's favorite book is Harry Potter, when they start writing as an author, their first few drafts might have some similarities to J.K. Rowling's work. This doesn't mean necessarily it's going to be super similar, but you might actually run into these similarities. And, we're social creatures. It's that whole idea of like your mom joking, if all your friends jump off a bridge, would you too? And it's like, well, realistically, as a social being, yeah, eventually, if all my friends jump off the bridge, like I may as well join them. Can't be that bad if they all do it.
I mean, they survived.
They
Hopefully.
survived. There's water under there,
My friends aren't idiots. Well, at least I don't.
Well, I may be an idiot, but
yeah, but we love you for it.
oh, thanks. Now,
Yeah.
I'm gonna move on to a completely different question, but I heard at the very beginning that you guys played a lot of tabletop RPGs together. Why do you play D&D, and what really got you started, or what was the reason that you really liked it? Maybe you can talk more on that.
Okay, where I got started is probably a good place to go. What got me
Yeah.
started on D&D was my high school math teacher. Um who honestly like she was my teacher for only about a year, but she was probably one of the more impactful teachers for me, was because first of all, I'd been in the pre-med program and very quickly realized I couldn't do calculus. I was trying my hardest and couldn't. I was getting like tutoring sessions, doing everything, just didn't work for my brain. But she suggested, so she tried starting up a D&D club and getting that running at our school, which was a little bit difficult to get going. But she also suggested to those of us who wanted to play to listen to some D&D podcasts, which the primary one that she recommended to us was Mabim Bam, My Brother, and Me.
Yeah, Adventure
Yes.
Zone.
So Adventure Zone. Yeah, I listened to the entire first campaign, the balance arc. I loved it. It's totally not by the rules, but I think that's what made
Not
it the
at all.
most fun. Like, I remember there was one time where someone cast like 6 spells in like one day. And it was like, yeah, this is fine.
Yeah.
But it was just a fun podcast and that I listened to. And then I listened to some Critical Role, of course, like most people have, and then a couple other D&D podcasts. And I got the opportunity to start playing D&D kind of with some friends toward the end of high school online. Kind of like when we were first trying to do like D&D where we like rolled with like Discord bots and it was terrible. And then I started playing at my university's D&D club, which was actually really fun. I got an amazing DM who, like, it was my first in-person game, super exciting. Made it this very interesting campaign. It started as Out of the Abyss and then just morphed into a very, like, I think there was a lot of homebrew in it and just a interesting world with so many twists and turns, and been one of my most, like, favorite experiences doing D&D. And then I met some friends online through university who like kind of linked me up with the domino effect, 6 degrees of separation. And there was this guy called Austin who was doing a Star Wars D&D. I had never played Star Wars before. However, I was enjoying the heck out of D&D, and I decided I wanted to play. So I basically just asked him, I'm like, hey, do you have an open slot? Like, are you willing to let me like join? I've never played Star Wars before. I've never watched Star Wars before. I know nothing. I just want to play. And he was like, yeah, sure, fuck it.
Yeah.
And I got into it, and then it was through them that I met Malcolm and kind of went down that rabbit hole to now I play with Malcolm about once a week. I have another D&D game that plays on Sundays every week that's still a Star Wars D&D game. It's mostly the same, relatively the same crew that we started with right at the start of the pandemic. And then I've run my own games as a DM, but the primary reason I play D&D is partially it is absolutely a social game. I have made so many friends through D&D. I've got to experience just different people, how their minds work, their worldviews, and it has been fantastic. But the other primary thing I really get to experience through D&D is a certain amount of escapism, Sadly, I am not a, dexterity 20 rogue who can do like 17 backflips and like, sneak in through a secret lair, nor am I a wizard who can cast fireball, which like would be pretty cool. But it's that whole idea of getting to go to that world other than your own. It's part of why I loved reading so much as a kid was, I'd imagine myself, like, when I was reading Percy Jackson, it was like, what would, you're imagining yourself as like, what would you do if you're a demigod's kid? And, you take like all those like shitty, like, those like homemade fan quizzes that existed in like the early 2010s.
Oh, I did all of them. What kind of demigod would I be under? Or like
what kind of demigod? What house were you in Hogwarts? What like
Gryffindor?
Like what district would you be from the Hunger Games? Like all that shit. Like I did that, and I loved it. And I think that's kind of formed my now love of D&D, especially because like when we say D&D, I'm not necessarily always referring to Dungeons and Dragons. It's kind of more became an overarching term. Like I play. I'm currently playing like Cyberpunk as a system. Yeah, Cyberpunk Red. And then we've also played we did like a homebrew that was based on Cyberpunk for Mass Effect. We've played
Vampire the Masquerade.
That's a really fun system. I
That's
quite
a good
enjoyed
one.
that. We've played a version of Vampire Hunters, which was also really cool. We also did. Oh my gosh, its name is slipping my mind. It's that trilogy. It's a fantastic trilogy of video
Lord of the
games.
Rings? The Witcher?
Oh,
Dragon Age.
Dragon Age.
Dragon Age!
Yeah, like we played Dragon Age. Awful system, but actually it was awful system. It was fun to play though.
I mean, that's one of those that's really, it does show that social aspect, is that system itself may not have been any good, but it was still a really fun game because you were doing it with the people that you wanted to do it with, and in a way you wanted to, right?
Exactly. Like we're getting to play these characters who are just, it's whatever you want to do. I'm playing this medic whose parents wanted her to be a warrior, who just met up with these people who are like, another mage and two dwarves, and was like, well, guess I'm thrown in with this lot.
Eh. Motley
And
Crew.
Exactly. But I think that's the beauty of D&D, is that also you get to make these characters and you get to almost, live little snapshots of lives other than your own.
Mhm.
And you get to experience those and think about how you would react if you were this person. How does that kind of change? And how, you as a person both grow by, talking with and experiencing these other people that you play with, but
Mhm.
also how, D&D has kind of just shaped so much of my own life, because it's become kind of one of those things I look forward to. Like I do it every Sunday night. I joke to my mom that, this is me going to church. It's a place where I find my own personal version of, I guess it feels kind of home, if that makes sense, would be the best way I'd describe getting to play D&D. It makes me feel happy, and it's just a fun experience.
It's a chosen home, much like the chosen family that plays it with you.
Exactly.
It's that community, it's that camaraderie to share just an hour or maybe 2 or 4 or whatever. Just to
Those are some weak sauce numbers.
I'm sorry, I played D&D for that amount of time, and
Casual.
I'm a casual. Yeah. But you do it for the camaraderie to be with like your built family and just the people you've surrounded yourself with, and it's something to look forward to at the end of the week almost.
Yeah, exactly. And then I've also I've built more D&D games into my schedule, but for me that's been a big part of the fun of D&D, is getting to spend time with people who you care about, and to have that whole idea of, we're going to come together, we're going to do something together, and it's going to be something we all create. It's not just the dungeon master who makes this big plan of an overarching campaign. It's these players are joining, and everybody's making a story together, and it's the story that we choose to tell together that really, the true magic was the friends we made along the way.
Some anime moral or morality.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, I mean, honestly, I think that's a really beautiful note to end on. The true magic was the friends we made along the way.
Like the friendship we made today with
There you go.
With Cam. Well, Cam, thank you so much for being on our podcast, Waiting for Seconds. It was really, really good to get to know you, because this was kind of my personal chance to get to know you, see who you are, and why you are the way
certainly a way
you are.
to break the ice, a 45-minute interview.
A 45-minute interview podcast where, yeah. Well, before we end the podcast, I want to say thank you to 2 very important people who have helped in the making of this podcast. I was so bad and didn't remember to mention them in the last 3 episodes, but from now on, we will be giving shout outs, specifically Malcolm and I. Sorry, Cam. We'll be giving shout outs to them. The first person I want to thank is Nadia Diaz. She did our cover art for this podcast. and her Instagram is at artheadcreations, no spaces, no caps. That is at artheadcreations on Instagram, and I will put the link in the description so you can find it there as well. And the second person I want to thank is Jensen Krall, who made our intro and outro song for this podcast. So thank you guys so much for helping make this podcast. If you're
They're
listening.
both amazing and did amazing work.
But finally, thank you so much, Cam, for talking about yourself on our podcast. I really hope you had a good time, and I really appreciate you sharing some deeper parts of your life with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and good luck with your future podcasts.
Thank you very much. Well, I think we'll see you next time.
This has been Waiting for Seconds. We'll see you guys later. Bye.